Hello everyone, welcome to our next lecture. So this will be part 1 of 2 on our series talking about proteins. So today we're looking at dietary proteins, including food sources, recommended intakes, or RDAs, recommended daily allowance. What are some high protein diets? We'll also be looking at amino acid structure and polarity, zooter ions, essential/non-essential, amino acids, standard, non-standard, and complete, incomplete, as well as protein synthesis. So we've went over this briefly, but our protein structures can be in our primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. We can also have dynamic proteins involved in transport, such as our hormones and in muscle contraction. So our actin, myosin, and then many other motor proteins involved. Spelled that wrong. As well as our static proteins, which include our extracellular matrix proteins. So just like some of our channels and stuff like that, or something on a cell membrane. So on a dry matter basis, approximately 50% of our body mass comes from protein. So as you guys we know about DNA and RNA, the goal is to form proteins. And again, most of our body, of around 50%, is using these proteins. So now we're going to discuss our dietary protein. So here we have a list of just the approximate protein sources in food. So this is just to give you a quick orientation. So surprisingly, ostrich has a lot of grams of protein. So if you're looking to get jacked, maybe ostrich is the food for you. I'm not sure where to get it. I've never had it. But again, we have our common things like beef, poultry, fish, and eggs. So one thing to consider when you look at this is how beef, if you're into you'll see some researchers come out about how beef can be red meat can be bad. So you can see how poultry and fish give you the same protein content, but maybe some less of the negative effects that are associated with beef. Here we have milk. Even milk is 8 grams. We have cheese. And again, here we can see the the vegetable stuff. So here you can see soybeans have a ton of protein as well, as much as ostrich. So you can get a lot of protein from non-meat sources. So the conventional protein intake recommendations. So Health Canada, protein recommendations are reported as a percentage of total energy intake. So the recommendation is 10 to 35% of your daily total energy intake, with the highest levels especially for pregnant women. So pregnant women require more protein than the average person, and as well as athletes in high-intensity training. So here we can see kind of the recommendations to meet the guidelines. So these measures are reported in grams per kilogram of body mass per day. So you can calculate this here. We can see here our body mass. So again, we convert our weight from pounds to kilograms by division. So 160 pounds, for example, divide by 2.2. And then we get our kilograms. You can put in here. And then, and then we can get here. And this is a recommendation. So for average adult, you need 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. So then you would time this answer by 0.8. So for an active adult, so you exercise, meet the recommended activity levels, work out 3 times a week, just your average active adult, you need 1.3, 0.18 to 1.3. For a growing athlete, we also need 1.3 to 1.9, as well as adult building body mass. And it's actually studies that have come out that saying older adults actually need this higher end to help combat like the loss of muscle mass and different things like that. Because as you get older, food intake also tends to decrease, so it's good to have a high protein diet to kind of balance it out. So here's an example. So again, we talked about that. You can actually calculate this. So again, here we had the RDA. So this is where we get that RDA, where we'll see here. So how much protein is Andrew, 155-pound adult? So in a high training period. So again, we get our kilograms, our grams per kilogram. So we do that 75.5 times 1.39 minus. So essentially, the reason you just times it by both is getting the range. And again, this is not minus, just range. Sorry about that. So the lower range would be 92, where the higher end would be 134 grams per day. So that's quite a bit for an active athlete if you really think about it. Because you think about some stuff on the back of the box, like a bowl of cereal will have like 6 grams or 7 grams of protein. So you need to get that all the way up to 134. So if you only ate pasta or something later in the day, you're not getting nearly enough protein, especially if you're a high training period. So again, here's an example of a high protein diet. So, well, not an example, but we can see through here, we see his range. So 125, so he's within the range, but we'll get to that soon. So here, if you can, this is how you can try to, again, this is how you can multiply it. So 1.5 cups of mini wheat cereal. So 1.5 times 4 grams per 1.5 cups, 12 grams. You can see he's getting high protein through his dairy products and his meat products, as well as his vegetables and as well as seed. We can see his largest source is his black beans and the cheese. So amino acid structure. So we talked about this a little bit, the structure before in our first lecture, but also in our biology. So again, here we can see our amine group, which is the functional group. This is the amino terminal, which is for this end, this is the amino terminal end of the amino acid. We have the carboxylic acid. So here we see our carboxylic acid and carboxyl terminal. And then we have our R, which is the side chain, which determines which amino acid it really is. And again, there are variable compositions, and they may or may not contain functional groups. So Zwitter ions. So essentially, Zwitter ions are essentially kind of the ionized form of a protein, as we can see here. So unionized form, you can see what's missing in these little charges. So we'll see here that certain proteins are placed into different groups based on their positive, negative charge and stuff like that. So here we have an ionized form, or the Zwitter ion. So again, amino acids do have polarity. So polarity exists at both the carboxyl and amino acid terminals. So here we can see the charges. And then this is also true for our side chain, because this determines the overall properties of the amino acid, including polarity. So essentially, the amino acid is kind of in a balanced state, but whatever this is determines what it's determined, if it's a negative or positive polarity, which we'll get into soon. So, as we mentioned, amino acids are joined by peptide bonds via condensation reactions. So again, condensation reactions, we get resultant water is removed from the equation, or essentially H2O is. So again, condensation reaction, there's a loss of water and joining of two molecules. So this is a combination reaction where water is removed. So here we can see the formation of two amino acids, 1 and 2, into a dipeptide, A1 and 2. And this dipeptide can form peptide bonds with a large polypeptide, where we have our, again, we see this is our amino terminal or amino terminus and carboxy terminal or terminus at one end and the other of the amino acid or polypeptide. So as we said, there's different ways to classify all the different amino acids, but one of the larger ones is the essential amino acids and non-essentials. So first, we have essential amino acids, where the body cannot make them, so we must obtain them from the diet. But interestingly, arginine and histidine are essential only in children. So later in life, we can develop these. Are essential only in children. So later in life, we can produce them in ourselves, but early in life, we need to initiate it from our diet. But most complete proteins will get you covered, but we'll talk about it later. Then our non-essential amino acids can be synthesized by the body. So here's a good mnemonic to remember the proteins, the essential proteins. Private Tim Hall. So again, we have our, you can kind of just go through phenylalanine, valine, threonine, etc., tryptophan, etc., etc., etc. But that's a good way. So again, PV Tim Hall. So here we can see we have a full list of our amino acids. Then, as I said, we have classification based on side chain polarity and side chain acidity, neutrality, or basicity. So here we can see the charge. Here's the charge. Whether it's acidic or basic and or neutral. So we can see here we can have nonpolar or polar, acidic, neutral, weakly basic, neutral, and acidic. And we'll classify these. We'll go into more detail about this classification later. So first, we're going to look at the nonpolar amino acids. So again, nonpolar side chains means it consists mainly of carbon and hydrogen atoms, i.e. hydrocarbons. So you can see all our hydrogens, and have a neutral charge. So nonpolar equals neutral. Sorry, my pen was neutral. Oh, just so you know, cysteine and methionine are the two sulfur-containing amino acids. So here we can see our S as our two sulfurs. So essentially, we see that one negative, one positive. They essentially balance each other out. So negative, positive, negative, positive. So it's an equal balance, i.e. neutral. So now we have our polar or neutral, but, oops, sorry, I can hear my cat. So polar neutral amino acids contain a polar functional groups, OH and NH2. These can occur in both ionized, both acidic, basic, and have both acidic and basic pHs, and non-ionized, i.e. neutral pH forms. So these can be in either the different pHs. What we can see here, our polar amino acids include serine, threonine, tyrosine, asparagine, and glutamine. Now we have our polar amino acids, are polar, both basic and acidic. So our basic amino acids include lysine, arginine, and histidine. So these polar basic amino acids carry a positive charge and have the amine group NH2. So we can see that extra positive here with the NH2, with the NH. And then we have our acidic amino acids, which are aspartic acid and glutamic acid. And these carry a negative charge. As you can see, there's an extra carboxylic acid group with the extra negative charge. So we can have complete versus incomplete protein. So I mentioned this with referencing when we're talking about the different foods. So a complete protein contains all the essential amino acids. So our beef, let's just say, that would cover us for all the essential amino acids we talked about. So remember, those are Private Tim Hall. And these are mainly our animal proteins. But we also have incomplete proteins. So that means they're missing some of the essential amino acids. So even if it's just one, it'd be considered non-essential. So these include our plant proteins. But vegetarians can still get all the essential amino acids by eating a variety of plant-based protein sources. So different plant sources have different proteins. So one might be missing one while one's missing the other. So if you combine the right proteins, you would get your full protein source. So an example of the use of amino acids is tryptophan. And this is a medication, so you can see a pure tryptophan supplement. So here we can see tryptophan is broken down to serotonin and then into melatonin. We also have, can be broken down to niacin. And another, which if you're avid gym goer, you may know about these, the branched chain amino acids, or BCAAs. And these include valine, leucine, and isoleucine. Sorry, my cat. So these BCAAs are shown to aid in recovery from exercise with respect to not only protein synthesis, but also aiding in replacing our own muscle glycogen and delaying fatigue-associated muscle exercise. So these are the proteins that have been associated the most with muscle recovery and exercise. The RDA, or recommended daily allowance, is approximately 4 to 5 milligrams per kilogram per day of leucine, and 22.5 of isoleucine and valine is suggested. So a lot of people work out, they recommend you can get these in supplements or you can get them in protein shakes and stuff like that. But yeah, so that was the end of our first part of proteins. So as you can see, it's Again, as I mentioned, it's kind of kinesiology focused. So we're going to bring it back to stuff like this. But yeah, we'll see you in the next protein lecture.